The china clinked softly as I set my fork down. The scent of rosemary chicken filling the dining room of my daughter's house in Charleston. At 72, I'd learned the value of silence, but silence didn't shield me from the sound of Sloane's voice as she leaned forward, eyes bright with determination. "We've already shipped our furniture," she announced as if she were sharing joyous news. "Your Seaside villa is empty, too big for one person." I folded my hands in my lap, pressing my thumb against the ridged wedding band I still wore. My late husband, Gabriel, would have chuckled at the audacity. Instead, I allowed myself a small smile that no one at the table seemed to notice. Last month, I had quietly transferred the villa into a protective trust. Whatever schemes they had in mind would crash against that wall of paperwork like waves against the Cape May rocks. Damien, ever the opportunist, dabbed his lips with his napkin. "It's just common sense. Mother, the children need space, and you're hardly ever there. My neighbor had already warned me weeks ago that Sloane and Damien had met with a realtor, whispering as if the villa were already theirs. That knowledge sat in my pocket like a sharp stone, a reminder of how far entitlement can travel when fed by assumption. The children need the sea air," Sloane pressed, her tone sweet but edged. "It will be good for them, and you'll still have your city life. Everyone wins." I reached for my glass, letting the stem cool against my fingers. I gave no protest, no hint of the preparations I'd made, because nothing disarms the greedy quite like the sound of their own certainty. Instead, I smiled again and nodded, as though her plan had merit. Beneath the table, my hands tightened, remembering Gabriel's words, "Guard it well." The conversation moved on, with Sloane boasting about the children's new tutors and Damien calculating aloud how convenient the location would be. I let them talk, let them build castles in the air, all the while knowing the foundation they believed in was already out of their reach. And so I sat, sipping wine, waiting for the moment when dreams would meet stone. After dinner, when the noise of Sloane's household still lingered in my ears, I retreated in memory to Cape May, to the villa Gabriel and I had brought back to life. The place had been little more than a sagging frame when we first walked through it. Salt-eaten beams, peeling shutters, floors that groaned beneath our steps. Yet Gabriel saw promise where others saw decay. We spent years sanding, painting, hauling driftwood for the deck railings, and planting roses along the seaside path. I can still picture him, sleeves rolled up, humming some old hymn as he patched the roof himself. It was in those years of sweat and laughter that he turned to me one evening, the Atlantic winds whipping through the open windows, and said, "Sloane will see this place as her prize someday. Guard it well." His voice carried the weight of knowing, and I brushed it aside then, unwilling to believe our daughter could covet what was never hers. I had given much to ensure she lacked nothing, sacrificed my art career to fund her private schooling, poured savings into Damien's ill-fated startup, each time telling myself love meant giving until it hurt. What remained was the villa. Not just brick and wood, but my last sanctuary, where Gabriel's presence lingered in every wall. Tonight, after leaving their table, I unlocked the desk in my bedroom and found the folded letter Gabriel had written before his final illness. The ink had faded, but the words burned as clearly as the day I first read them. "This house is your shield. Don't surrender it to anyone." I pressed the letter to my chest, hearing his voice again, steady and sure, as if he were guiding me still. The villa was more than real estate. It was dignity carved into wood and stone, the one piece of my life not bartered away, and as I slipped the letter back into its envelope, I knew the time was coming when his warning would be tested. The following weekend, I sat on the porch of the villa with a cup of tea, the salt wind carrying the sound of gulls across the dunes. The rumble of a diesel engine broke the calm. A moving truck lumbered down the lane and stopped in front of the gate. Sloane's SUV pulled in right behind it. The children tumbled out first, running toward the steps as if the house were already theirs. Damien climbed out with a clipboard, barking orders to the movers. And then Sloane, in wide sunglasses and a forced smile, called out, "We're here." I rose slowly, leaning on the railing, and waited as she swept past me, ushering the children inside. Within moments, her smile collapsed. The guest rooms were empty beds dismantled, closets bare, floors stripped to plywood. The kitchen echoed with the absence of appliances. "What have you done?" she demanded. "Prepared," I said evenly. "Contractors arrive Monday. Full renovations kitchen, bedrooms, garage. Nothing here will be livable for at least 6 months." Damien frowned. "But you didn't mention this at dinner." "No," I replied, sliding a folder from my handbag. "Because it was already settled. Signed contracts. Permits filed. Everything in order." Sloane's face flushed crimson. "We told the kids this was their summer home. They've already chosen their rooms." I turned the first page of the agreement toward her. "Then they'll be disappointed. The demolition begins here." I tapped the highlighted line, "with the master suite." Her eyes widened. That was the room she had claimed for herself, the one she'd boasted about, redecorating in soft blues. The children drifted back into the hallway, confused by the bare walls. Damien muttered something about wasted effort, but I heard the tightness in his voice. I closed the folder and returned it to my bag. The movers stood idle, waiting for instructions, their eyes flicking between us. "Perhaps," I said gently, "you should call the storage company instead." Sloane's mouth opened, then closed again, her certainty dissolving as the sound of hammers already echoed faintly from the contractor's truck, pulling into the drive. Damien's voice cracked the air like a whip. "Family has rights. Evelina, you can't just shut us out of what should belong to all of us." He stood in the gutted hallway, shoulders squared as though force could turn fiction into truth. I did not argue. I simply reached for my phone and placed a calm call to Mr. Crane. Within the hour, his gray sedan rolled up the sandy drive. He emerged, neat in his navy suit despite the heat, his briefcase swinging like a gavel in motion. We gathered at the dining table, little more than plywood now, dust drifting down from exposed beams. Mr. Crane clicked open his case and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "Mrs. Harrington transferred ownership of this villa into a private trust 6 weeks ago," he announced. "As trustee, she alone holds authority. No family member has legal claim." Damien sputtered, color rising in his cheeks. "This is outrageous. She never told us." "Because it was none of your business," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This villa is not a toy to be passed around when convenient. It is my home, my shield." Sloane's lips parted as if she'd been struck. For a moment, I saw the little girl who once clung to my skirt in fear of thunderstorms, but that softness evaporated into resentment as she turned away. Mr. Crane slid another document across the table. "In addition, your mother authorized installation of a new security system. Police will be notified instantly if unauthorized entry is attempted. The locks have already been changed." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the contractor's saw outside. Damien clenched his jaw, and Sloane pressed her hands against the bare table as though steadying herself against a storm. I folded the papers neatly back into their envelope. "You may choose anger if you wish, but the law is not on your side, and neither am I outside." The contractors hammered steadily, a sound that carried the weight of permanence, leading us into the next inevitable conflict. By mid-morning, the quiet hum of the contractors was drowned out by the groan of another moving truck pulling into the drive. I stepped onto the porch with my teacup, its steam curling into the salty air, and watched as men in gray uniforms began hauling Sloane's furniture onto the gravel. An armoire scraped against the tailgate, followed by a velvet sofa and boxes marked fragile. The neighbors across the street had paused their gardening to watch. One even leaned on her rake, eyebrows raised in silent question. Sloane appeared, flustered, ushering the movers with sharp gestures. Damien stood with arms crossed, his face flushed a shade deeper with every item placed in my driveway. "Mother," Sloane hissed under her breath. "Please, just let them bring it inside before the children see." Everyone's staring. I took a slow sip of tea, savoring the warmth. "Yes," I replied softly. "They can finally see the truth." Before she could protest further, I raised my hand to the lead mover. "Gentlemen, there's been a change of plans. This furniture does not belong here. Redirect it to the storage facility on Bayview Road." I handed him a slip of paper, already prepared unit number, prepaid receipt, all arranged days earlier. The man glanced at Damien, then back at me. My calm voice carried the authority Damien's bluster could not match. With a shrug, he signaled the crew to reload. Sloane's jaw dropped. Damien sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "And I already have." That evening, once the driveway was clear, I placed a small envelope in the mail. Inside were the keys to the storage unit and a copy of the receipt Damien's name printed neatly across the top. There would be no denying who was responsible. As dusk fell, I returned to the porch, the last of the dust settling where their furniture had stood. The villa stood unencumbered, and for the first time in days, I felt the air around me lighten, carrying me toward the next storm waiting to break. That night, as the villa settled into silence, I sat at the old oak desk with a small box of papers I had kept hidden for years. The scent of cedar clung to the folded documents, reminders of choices I had once made in the name of love. I remembered the day I mortgaged part of this house to fund Sloane's first boutique. She was 30 then, wide-eyed with dreams of silk dresses and imported perfumes. Just a small push. Mother. She had pleaded. I gave her more than a push, I gave her collateral. My sanctuary as guarantee. Within 2 years, the boutique folded, debts piling high while she moved on to the next bright idea. I told myself then it was worth it. That mother's sacrifice without keeping tally. But tucked beneath those mortgage papers lay a darker truth. A loan application from 10 years ago, my name scrawled at the bottom in a handwriting that was almost, but not quite mine. Sloane had forged my signature, secured money in my name, and when the bank called, I paid quietly to keep her from ruin. I buried the shame, convincing myself it was an isolated mistake. Now, with her furniture rerouted and her temper smoldering, I placed the forged document on the dining table when she and Damien returned the next day. Sloane's eyes flicked over the page, color draining from her cheeks. "You stole from me once," I said, my voice steady. "And I forgave you. Not this time." Her lips trembled before twisting into anger. "You're abandoning your own family." Damien shifted uncomfortably beside her, his eyes darting between us. I saw the flicker of doubt in him, the realization that I might hold more evidence, more secrets she had hidden. I gathered the papers back into their folder, the weight of them heavy but clarifying. Some truths could no longer stay buried, and as their silence grew thick in the gutted villa, I knew the next line they crossed would no longer be met with quiet forgiveness, but with the cold certainty of consequence. The attempt came just after sunset. I was in the kitchen rinsing my teacup when I heard the scrape of metal in the front lock. Damien's silhouette leaned into the door, fumbling with a key I knew too well. An old spare, hidden years ago, long since made useless by new locks. The alarm shrieked to life, filling every room with a piercing wail. Floodlights flared across the porch. I stepped back, heart steady, as Damien cursed and kicked at the door. Within minutes, blue and red lights painted the driveway, sirens slicing the night. 2 patrol cars pulled up. The officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts, but faces calm. I opened the side door to greet them, smoothing my shawl as though nothing unusual had occurred. "Good evening, gentlemen. Coffee." Damien's rage spilled across the porch. "This is my mother-in-law's house. She's lost her mind, locking us out like criminals." One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I said evenly. And these two, I gestured toward Damien and Sloane, were explicitly told not to enter. The children huddled in the back seat of their car, wide-eyed as the sirens faded. Sloane rushed forward, her voice trembling. "Please, officer, it's a misunderstanding. The kids just wanted to see their summer rooms." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, if your husband attempts this again, it will be considered trespassing. Formal charges could follow." Damien froze, his authority evaporating under the weight of law. Sloane's shoulders sagged, anger dissolving into something closer to shame as she pulled him back toward the car. The children's sobs carried in the humid air, but I did not move. I thanked the officers politely, promised to follow up with the station, and closed the door behind me. Through the window, I watched Damien retreat, his posture bent by something far heavier than defeat. The night returned to silence, save for the hum of the security system resetting itself, standing guard as I prepared for the storm that would break next. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel, the air heavy with the scent of rain. The last of Sloane's furniture still sat abandoned near the hedge, upholstered chairs stacked beneath a tarp that flapped uselessly in the rising wind. I stood at the window, listening to the first growl of thunder, and decided I would not let their neglect rot on my land. I called a local auction house I had worked with before. Within an hour, a flatbed truck arrived, men in slickers moving quickly as the storm broke in earnest. Rain lashed the driveway, lightning flashed over the dunes, and piece by piece the furniture was hauled away. I photographed every item, each box and sofa logged carefully in a folder I would later send to my lawyer. By dusk, the driveway was clear, the storm rinsing away the dust they had left behind. I sat at the desk and drafted a letter to Damien, enclosing the receipt from the auction and a tax deduction certificate in his name. I imagined his face as he read it, thinking he had secured a prize, only to find himself reduced to paperwork and irony. The following morning, neighbors paused as I walked to fetch the paper. "Smart move," one of them murmured, nodding toward the empty drive. Another simply gave me a small smile, one of quiet approval. I knew how quickly gossip traveled in our little community. Soon, everyone would know the story of furniture carted off under storm clouds. The proud daughter left scrambling. Sloane, meanwhile, had stopped coming by. Word reached me that she was furious, humiliated, her voice rising on phone calls that carried across the street. I did not need to listen. The villa felt lighter. Each cleared space another reminder that I was not powerless. Yet I knew this calm was temporary, only a pause before the next confrontation that would test just how much more I was willing to endure. Lyra came alone the next weekend, her sneakers damp from the rain-soaked path. She lingered on the porch, as though crossing the threshold meant betraying her parents. When I opened the door, she folded into my arms with a force that surprised me. Her cheek was wet, though whether from the weather or her tears I couldn't tell. "I don't know what to do." "Grandma," she whispered, "they're angry all the time. They say you're cruel, but I don't feel that here." I led her into the sitting room. now stripped bare by renovations but warmed with the smell of chamomile tea. She perched on the edge of the chair, her hands twisting in her lap. I reached across, covering them with my own. "Lyra," I said gently, "you must understand something. Respect is the only inheritance I'll ever insist on leaving you. Houses can crumble, money can vanish. But if you learn to honor boundaries, your own and others, you will never be poor." Her eyes filled. "But what if respecting you means I lose them?" I stood and unlocked the desk drawer, retrieving a slim folder. Inside lay the updated will Mr. Crane had helped me draft. I placed it before her, letting her read the first page. Her lips moved silently over the words, and then she looked up, startled. "If your parents continue down this path," I explained, "the entire estate will bypass them. It will come to you and to a community trust that will serve others who truly need it. This house will not be fuel for their greed." Her tears spilled then, falling onto the paper. "I promise." "Grandma, I'll remember." I brushed her hair back, smiling at the earnestness in her young face. In that moment, I saw hope, not for Sloane or Damien, but for the bloodline beyond them. Gabriel's voice echoed in my memory. Guard it well. Perhaps I had, after all. Lyra tucked the folder back into my desk with careful hands. And when she left that evening, her step was lighter. Yet I knew her visit would stir the embers of another storm once her parents discovered where she had been. Morning sunlight spilled across the balcony as I bent to clip the first bloom of the season. The roses had taken to the salt air better than I expected, their petals unfurling with quiet defiance against the sea winds. Below, the waves thundered against the rocks, steady and unyielding, like the rhythm my life had found again. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Sloane glared across the screen. "You've lost your family." I let the words sit for a moment before exhaling softly. Then, almost without thinking, I whispered to the roses, "No, I've found myself." Joy arrived soon after, carrying a tin of shortbread, her laughter chasing away the last shadow of bitterness. We shared tea on the balcony, watching the gulls dip and soar. She admired the roses, and I told her, Gabriel had once dreamed of planting them here. Now, they were mine alone to tend, a living memory of love that had been real and steadfast. On weekends, Lyra came with her sketchbook, capturing the coastline in pencil and watercolor. She never spoke of her parents when she was here, only of the future she hoped to build. Together we painted the pergola, tended the garden, and planned small changes to make the villa even more our sanctuary. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It had become a home again, filled not with the echo of demands, but with the murmur of waves, the rustle of pages, the soft laughter of those who respected its walls. I set my teacup down and brushed soil from my hands, gazing at the sea stretching endless and free. Gabriel's letter was safe in my desk, his words alive in my choices. Love may open doors, but only respect keeps them open. When blood betrays you, is respect the truest form of love?